In the world of professional football, overreactions typically come on Mondays. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, overreactions come on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So on today's episode of Locked On Oilers, we're going to talk about some overreactions. And being that we're very early on in the NHL season, the Oilers sit at 2-4-0. They've played some very uneven hockey, and I think the schedule has not done them a whole lot of favors. I think when you're a team like the Oilers that is trying to work itself out of an early season funk to get up to game speed, to integrate some new pieces, you would like to be playing more than once every 3 to 4 days. I think the fact that the Oilers schedule is so broken up with so many off days, and this isn't a problem unique to the Oilers. I think there are quite a few teams across the NHL that would benefit from a more condensed schedule early on in the season. And look, I understand schedule making is very difficult, and there are a lot of factors at play as far as venue availability and logistics for travel. So I understand why the schedule is structured the way it is. But at the same time, the Oilers desperately need to get into a nice rhythm. And that's typically why teams that get into form after the trade deadline really are able to ramp up, because they're playing every other day and they got back-to-backs in there as well with the occasional off day squeezed in. And that gives you the opportunity to really get a good feel, to really get a good pace. And right now, as I've said for the better part of 2.5 weeks now, the Oilers are clunky. They are still ironing out a lot of things, and we've got a few different overreactions we are going to talk out here on today's show. And the first one is very straightforward. The Oilers defense is not as bad as it's played so far. And I'm going to make the case based on the evidence, the circumstantial evidence, that although the Oilers' underlying numbers are not bad, they're winning the possession battle. The fact that their defense is continually making simple mistakes, and those mistakes keep ending up in the back of the Edmonton net, that's the difference right now. Because when you go under the hood, defensively, the Oilers look pretty good. But when you watch the games, the Oilers' defense does not look very good. And sure, the Oilers are out possessing the other team. They're playing a lot of offense. And if you looked at just the underlying numbers, you would assume the Oilers were a dominant team, that they were off to, a 5-1 start. But when you look at what the team stats are, they sound good. They concede scoring chances per 60 minutes of 5-on-5 at the second lowest rate of the entire league. They concede 2.64 goals against per 60. So actual goals, they're middle of the pack. Expected goals, they're fifth. They concede the fifth fewest expected goals against per 60 in the entire NHL. They concede the second fewest high danger chances against per 60. But being that the Oilers have an .891 save percentage at 5-on-5 and are shooting 4.9%, they are getting smoked in terms of actual goals that go in the net. And I think there is a strong case. This is an example of a little bit of Murphy's Law, like we talked about last week on the show. We did a real breakdown of why shooting and goaltending are volatile game to game, and that over the course of a season, those numbers will typically stabilize. As I've said, I don't expect the Oilers to continue to be a single-digit shooting percentage team. There's simply too much talent. One of the other overreactions we have is about Zack Hyman, who still has yet to score a 5-on-5 goal, and he's not going to shoot 0% all year. Do I think he's probably going to be a lot closer to maybe 20, 25 goals than 30? Yeah, I think right now, based on the way the Oilers are going, there is cause for concern there, but taking a step back and thinking about it abstractly, and the Oilers themselves in their game day post today had a pull quote from somebody on the team who said, well, I think we would really benefit from scoring first, getting out to a lead, and that would help us find our game. And I wholeheartedly agree. The evidence supports that theory and statistically, and that's not just an Oilers phenomena, but teams in the NHL, when they play with leads, they're a lot more comfortable. They are able to play a little more balanced and a little less aggressive. And some teams, and I know the Oilers are guilty of this at times as well, once they get a lead, they really absorb pressure. And when you are a transition team like the Edmonton Oilers, who wants to get off to the races, use your speed to create odd man rushes, that is why you benefit from playing with a lead. Sure, the other team is probably going to have more possession. They're going to generate more scoring chances. But if you're taking a very defensive posture and the other team is shooting consistently from the circles, from the half wall, or the point, those scoring chances are very low quality. You are going to have ample opportunity to block them, for your goalie to get in a position to make the save, or for you to deflect the puck on the way in so it misses the net entirely. And then you can get going defense to offense. And you look at what the Oilers have done so far this year, as far as distributing their talent, they've got some nice speed in their bottom six. When you get Connor Brown going in a straight line, that boy can skate. And you have speed. You have Draisaitl, who, though not as fast in a straight line as McDavid, is just as effective in transition as far as gaining the zone with speed, setting up guys. But right now, the Oilers desperately need to get their offense going. And they have more than enough talent. And look, that's not a secret that the Oilers are a talented team, that they're underperforming right now, especially offensively. But the Oilers are a team that are predicated on scoring to win. They are not going to win rock fights. They are not going to win defense first hockey games because they're not constructed that way. For as good as their forward group is, they're going to give quite a bit back defensively, which is why it's so imperative that they do score. And I think the fact that the Oilers still haven't settled on Stetcher or Dermott as a full-timer. And look, I understand Dermott has 3 games, Stetcher has 4 games, Emberson has 5 games. It seems the Oilers are going to be a little more lenient with Emberson as far as keeping him on the third pair with Brett Kulak, and then they're going to try and figure it out on that second pair. And so far, it looks like Stetcher's got the inside track. That's what it looked like in the preseason, and the start of the season was that Stetcher was going to be more of a regular, where Dermott was going to be more of a 7th D. And I think Stetcher is a good enough skater that he can mitigate for some of his defensive deficiencies. He's undersized. He's not going to win a lot of puck battles. He's not going to recover a lot of loose pucks. He's not going to win a lot of leverage battles at the net front. But I do think the fact that he is getting real opportunity matters. I think I saw that the Oilers are going to attempt to play Darnell Nurse on both sides tonight, both the right and the left, to try and see whatever they can do to get him going. And I still think and still maintain that's the single most important thing the Oilers need to get right now, even more so than their offense, is finding a way for Darnell Nurse's impacts to be dulled. And if that's low event hockey, if that's playing less minutes, whatever it is, it takes to get better hockey out of Darnell Nurse, the Oilers have to go on and do it. So we are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we are going to tackle some more Edmonton Oilers overreactions coming up next. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. In the NFL this week, on Thursday Night Football, we got the Vikings and the Rams. The Vikings heading to LA to take on the Rams. The Rams 3.5-point home underdogs. We've got Jets and Patriots. The Jets 7-point road favorites coming off of their big Sunday Night Football loss to the Steelers. Good game. Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts heading to Cincinnati to take on Joe Burrow and the Bengals. The Bengals 2.5-point home favorites. Best game of the weekend, though, it's probably the Buffalo Bills heading to Seattle to take on the Seahawks. The Seahawks 3.5-point home underdogs. Head on over to FanDuel.com to get started and spice up your football watching experience. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are walking through some of the early season overreactions about the team so far. And look, I said it at the start of the first segment. I'm going to reiterate it here. We need more games. Just outright, the Oilers need to play more games before we can make definitive statements. And I think it will only help the problems the Oilers are dealing with right now the more games they get in, because the more games they get in, the better evidence they're going to have. And the more evidence you have, the better your decision making is ultimately. And I talk about this incessantly. You can't know something for sure until you have evidence. Once you have evidence, then you can start to make a decision. Those decisions are, you need to make your decisions based on evidence. There is nothing more infuriating to me as a sports fan and as a sports media person than when a team insults my intelligence, when it says things that aren't based in fact or that are based on feelings. Because ultimately, when you are making those appeal to emotion, when you are trying to make an argument, you know you don't have the evidence to support you. And look, after 6 games, you can't go make sweeping, definitive statements about the team at large. I do think some trends from last season that are still holding over, Stuart Skinner getting off to a slow start, the Oilers as a team at large getting off to a slow start. I do think there is something to that. I think Darnell Nurse's long-term issues are still trending in that direction, that this is more of who he is, and there isn't really a silver bullet fix to these problems. There's no obvious solution. The next overreaction is that Stuart Skinner is off, or I should say Stuart Skinner is a slow starter. I don't think that's an overreaction. I think stylistically, I think based on the evidence, and look, some of that is team. And I do want to emphasize that because I make this point a lot, but if you're new to the show, if you're not an everydayer, goaltending is extremely environmental. We were talking about the Oilers having like an .891 save percentage at 5-on-5 and shooting something like 4.9%. Those make it hard to be a goalie. When you are a great goalie, if you're Saros, if you're Shesterkin, if you're Vasilevsky, if you're Bobrovsky, Swayman, Ottinger, if you've got an extended track record of high caliber goalie play, I should say Connor Hellebuyck, if just in case a Jet fan stumbled in here by accident, don't want to slight Connor Hellebuyck, but unless you're one of those 5 or 6 guys who is good enough to make your environment better, to, change your environment, like Jack Nicholson says at the start of The Departed, it's really hard to be an impact goalie if you're not one of those guys. It's the same exact thing with football and quarterbacks. If you don't have Mahomes, you don't have Josh Allen, you don't have Lamar, even once you get past that, like Herbert played his butt off last night, but he did not have enough in his environment to make it better. And right now, the Oilers, the environment they are in, the puck keeps finding the back of the net. And some of that is on Stuart Skinner, that he needs to make one extra save because that goes a long way when you are in a difficult situation. But I want to see the Oilers find a way to start building some momentum and not be so reliant on your defense and Stuart Skinner to make a difference. Because right now, because the Oilers aren't scoring enough, their defense is having to play an outsized role in these games. If the Oilers are going to rely on defense and goaltending, they are not going to be a very good hockey team this year. Going and looking at the numbers for his career, Stuart Skinner is really rough the first 2 months of the season. In October and November for his career, he's an .897 save percentage, 3.055 goals against average, and he's 17, 18, and 1 in October and November in his NHL career. Now, November, 915 save, 2.58. January, 920 save, 2.43 goals against average. And then his best month in the NHL is January. His second best month is April, where it's 7-2-1, 918 save percentage, and 2.03 goals against average. And I think you see that mirrored in the Oilers as a team, their results. The Oilers got going crazy last year during that middle stretch of the season. Once Knoblauch came in, they rattled off 15 in a row. And I think those Skinner results are tightly related to the team results. When the team plays well, Stuart Skinner doesn't have to do a whole lot. And if he doesn't have to do a whole lot, he can make the easy saves. Then on occasion, if he's feeling himself, he can make a big save. And it really puts you in an advantageous position. But, and I said this the entirety of the Stanley Cup final against Florida, and I'll repeat it now if you're newer to the show, the Oilers cannot make Stuart Skinner the difference between winning and losing on a nightly basis. If he is just a guy on the team, the Oilers are in good shape. If Stuart Skinner needs to be the guy, you're asking too much of him. And I don't think that's a knock. I don't think that's being disrespectful or underrating him. He's a slightly above average goalie on a team that doesn't play great defense, that concedes a lot of rush opportunities because they want to play off of the rush. So when you put those environmental factors on where they're at, you combine that with the fact they're having a hard time scoring, this makes perfect sense. You know, I don't think Stuart Skinner is selling. I don't think he's doing an awful job. I just think when you are overly reliant on a guy who isn't good enough to steal games, you are putting yourself in a bad position. And again, there are only a handful of elite goalies. That's what makes them great. That's what makes those guys so good. There's only so much talent at every position in the NHL. You know, there's a finite amount of talent in the NHL, and the better you are, the more valuable you are. You know, you drop Shesterkin on this team, they probably have one or two more wins. I don't think that's too outlandish to say. I do think there's a pretty sizable gap between the top of the goalie pyramid and the middle of the goalie pyramid, where I think Skinner's pretty close to. But that said, Stuart Skinner's made some big saves and won some big games. You know, they did win the conference last year. He did outplay Jake Ottinger in the Western Conference Finals. Like, that did happen. That does count. So I think it's reasonable to say that Skinner is very much a product of his environment. And right now, the Oilers are in a difficult environment. They are playing a lot of offense. They are not scoring. They are being overly aggressive in the offensive zone. They're pinching. They're leaving guys back for conceding 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s. And those are hard. You know, the 2-on-1, the 3-on-2, it gets the goalie moving left to right. And those are the highest percentage shots in the NHL today. You know, we have yet to have the efficiency revolution in hockey that basketball has had, where it's basically only layups and threes. Hockey, there's still quite a bit of fluff shots that are just there to keep goalies honest, for spacing purposes. But the best play in hockey is the cross-seam pass. When you can get the goalie moving left to right, you have the best chance of scoring. And because the Oilers are losing in a lot of these games, they are needing to be more aggressive in the offensive zone. They are messing up their assignments in transition and leaving one defenseman back for 2-on-1s. And that means Skinner needs to do more. And look, I think once the Oilers get scoring, a lot of these problems are going to go away. I think they have quite a few players who have yet to really get going. You know, Arvidsson and Hyman in particular come to mind as two guys who have yet to really have a great game yet. And granted, you know, we've played 6 games over 2.5 weeks. The season started 2 weeks ago today. There is plenty of time for the Oilers to get these guys going. We are going to take one final break on today's show. And when we come back, we're going to hit 2 more overreactions coming up next on this edition of Locked On Oilers. We are all driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree. Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy, because everything is all in one place. You can use it for scheduling, screening, and messaging to connect with candidates faster. And Indeed leverages over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, meaning Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And as we move along on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to hit two last overreactions. Number one, Zach Hyman is regressing. And there are a few different ways a player can regress. You know, we can be talking about regression to the mean as far as they had an outlier season, better than they had typically done, you know, career highs, that type of thing. We could be talking about age-related regression, where a player starts to get a little bit older. They lose certain elements to their game and have to refine and emphasize certain points of their game. We could be talking about injury-related regression and, you know, compensating for an injury the way Darnell Nurse is. And in Hyman's case, it's tricky. We've only played a handful of games, so you don't want to go making snap judgments on what the data says. And he's playing about 40 seconds less per game at 5-on-5. But where it's different and where it's worth pointing out. So last year, he averaged 10.31 shots on goal per 60 minutes of ice time. This year, that's down to 6.8 shots per 60 minutes. Last year, 1.52 individual expected goals per 60. This year, 1.3. Last year, 18.1 individual scoring chances per 60. This year, 21.08 individual scoring chances per 60. So that tells me a few things. Those numbers tell me a few things. Number one, it tells me that he isn't getting as many shots on net because the scoring chances are up, but the shots on goal are down. That's number one. I do think that has been noticeable over the first 2 weeks that the Oilers have had a lot of shots blocked on the way in because they've been behind. And teams like playing defense with a lead because they can compress around the net front, they can block shots, and they can really they can lighten the quality of scoring chances for the opposition. I think you see that in the fact that his individual expected goals are a little bit lower. And the reason I'm highlighting Hyman in particular here is both A, he's yet to score at 5-on-5, and then B, because the line numbers are pretty comparable. You know, him and McDavid this year versus last year in terms of rate, they're pretty similar, you know, within one or two scoring chances for and against. They just aren't getting the puck to go in a whole lot. And I think the fact that Hyman isn't shooting as much, and I think the fact that he's getting some more shots blocked than he has in years past, I do think some of this is just, they got to get going. You know, they've alternated who's been on the wing between Nuge, between Draisaitl, between Jeff Skinner. So I do think as that left wing spot with McDavid and Hyman gets solidified, I do think the numbers, at least the puck is going to start going in the net a little bit more. And I do think that'll help. You know, what makes Hyman so dangerous is his tenacity and his ability to occupy quality areas of the ice, you know, working to get to the net front, working to win loose pucks behind the net to keep plays alive. And he's still on the ice, you know, he's still noticeable. You still see him out there. It's just the synergy hasn't really come together yet in a way that it needs to. And I'm not ready to say that, you know, oh, it's over. He peaked last year, because it's only been 2.5 weeks and the whole team is kind of in a weird funk right now, especially offensively. You know, the power play can't score a lick right now. And I want to see the Oilers find ways to just get Hyman some shots on goal. You know, you think about the Dion Waiters joke of I'd rather you go 0 for 38 than 0 for 28, because that means you stop shooting. You lost confidence if you stopped at 0 for 28. And the Oilers need to get going. It's really that straightforward. You know, I feel like I've been saying that for a week now, but until they start scoring, these games are going to continue to be annoying. They're going to continue to be difficult. And then the one last overreaction before we get out of here. Kris Knoblauch has a hard job ahead of him. And I think that is not an overreaction. I think people take for granted how much continuity matters. And when you turn over 3 defensemen and 3 forwards in a single offseason and an offseason and a season before that went all the way till the end of June. I think there are so many moving parts here, and I really want people to take a deep breath and embrace the grind, because that's what this is, man. The 82 game regular season, the Oilers got 76 to go now. It is a grind to make it to the end of June. It is a real pressure cooker. It is a real humanity experience defining. You know, it's a really fascinating lens to view the human condition through professional sports, and trying to be the best all of the time, and the hyper competitiveness, and embracing the journey of going from a kid to a prospect to a player, and how the experiences of players impact their journeys. I find it eminently fascinating, and why I love sports so much. You know, when these guys embrace the journey. You know, Jeff Skinner's been in the league 14 years now. He's never played in a playoff game. Corey Perry's 38 years old. He's been to 5 Cup finals. He's only won once. You know, the journey matters. It is part of the story. And as much as I lament the use of storylines as a crutch in analysis, I do care about them. You know, they are interesting. They are compelling beyond looking at it as an intellectual pursuit. The human condition is part of the experience. Understanding the highs, the lows, the grind, all of that matters. And the Oilers right now are facing adversity. They are facing pressure. And I have always and firmly believed that in professional sports, pressure is a privilege. That means people expect great things from you because you're capable of them. The Oilers are capable of great things. There's not a doubt in my mind that all it's going to take is a little kick in the butt, 1 or 2 goals to go in. They're going to score 7 or 8 goals in a game over the next 2 weeks. Everyone will exhale. Hyman will get on the sheet. We'll get Arvidsson on the sheet. And then everything is going to start to fall into place. They're going to start scoring more regularly, which is going to give their defense a little more breathing room, which is going to give Stuart Skinner a little more breathing room. And then as that synergy, as that confidence builds, the special teams units are going to come along, because right now the penalty kill and the power play are both awful. They are conceding on more than half of the penalty kills they play, and they have 1 singular power play goal in 6 games. And this is a team that was running at like 30 some odd % after 2 rounds in the playoffs last year. So that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. But before we get out of here, if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live, and leave me a comment. What are you worried about so far through 2.5 weeks? And thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.